Welcome to this edition of the Shared Security Show. And joining me today is special guest Chris Kirsch, co-founder and chief revenue officer at Rumble, which is an asset discovery solution. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it is a pleasure to have you, and it's great to talk to you again. Since I know we were both former coworkers at Veracode back in the day.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, but those of you that don't know Chris, he has more than 2 decades in InfoSec, and he's worked for a lot of different companies. Rapid7, he was on the Metasploit and incident response products. Of course, he was in product marketing at Veracode, and where I got to work with Chris. But he's also a black badge winner at DEF CON's Social Engineering Capture the Flag competition. And I know you know Rachel Toback pretty well, right? She's been on the show before too.
Awesome, yeah.
So you know her.
She's fantastic.
Oh, she's wonderful, yeah. And the other thing I want to mention about Chris is that he's also a master pickpocketer. So be very careful if you happen to be in the same physical location as Chris, because you might lose your wallet.
You know, it's funny. I always think of picking up all of the skills that you need for a heist movie. And pickpocketing was on my list, and I always thought that was really cool to learn. And I studied it for 6 months, driving my husband absolutely insane. And then I gave like 1 talk at Veracode to practice, 1 talk at Layer 8, and then I never did it again. So I'm not even sure if I could do it anymore, but it's a fun story.
Yeah. Is there like a presentation? Is that presentation at Layer 8? Is that online? Because I'd love to link that.
Yes, it is. Yeah, I think it's called... I think if you search for Kirsch pickpocketing, then you'll find it. It's basically an instructional video on how to pickpocket, like how it works and so on. I made the topic to be for red teamers, right? So you learn all of the techniques, but it's kind of like, okay, how could you apply this on a red team engagement? I thought that was kind of like an interesting take on it. And Layer 8 took me on. And then we also did, and you saw this, well, you were remote at Veracode, right? So you might not have seen it, but I did the same pickpocketing competition with everybody wearing, fake wallets and what do you call it, phones and keys and so on, and badges, right? They were all bright green, and people wore these stickers that said, I consent to being pickpocketed, green items only, right? So you opt in. And it was a ton of fun. It was so much fun. I remember both at Veracode. At Veracode, we did it for 3 days straight, which was awesome because people then forget that they have the items on them. And at Layer 8, we did it for the full day of the conference, right?
Yeah. That is awesome. Yeah, good times for sure. I was watching that talk remotely, and it was amazing. So good stuff.
Good,
so
thank you.
So today we're here to talk about asset inventory, and this is actually a hot topic. And ironically, we had just talked about this on last week's podcast, because I'm sure you've heard about the issue with the drinking water systems in the U.S. There's like 52,000. Apparently, these organizations, they all run the water systems all a little bit differently across the country. And this is a Brian Krebs article, by the way. And he had said that 52,000 of these companies haven't even done an asset inventory of their network. Maybe that's 52,000 new customers for you, Chris, after I've just told you that.
It's really interesting. It's such an age-old problem, right? I mean, when HD and I were at at Rapid7, we started working there 10 years ago-ish, and then, stopped working there about 5 years ago. It was already a problem then when customers told us that, yes, vulnerability scanning is great and fine, but we would just love to know what we even have on our network. And I thought, maybe that problem is solved now and so on. We did some research and discovered that no, like the companies that come to us, they're not only the laggards, even some of the biggest tech companies out there, very advanced companies across all industries don't really have a good way to inventory assets. it's quite interesting. And that goes down all the way down to, things like water supply. I think those kind of environments suffer from the same kind of problems as other utilities, like electrical utilities and so on, where they have old networks. They're often underfunded because they're owned by the city, they're owned by the state, or they're nonprofits and those kind of things. And so they have old equipment and they don't have the best means to solve the problem. So if the big tech companies can't solve it, then the little guys, like when the article came out about the water supply, I really wasn't surprised.
No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. So maybe tell us a little bit about Rumble and, maybe how this all got started and, what you guys are doing for asset inventory.
Great. Yeah. So it started, way back when HD and I were working on Metasploit together. We heard from customers this feedback that asset inventory was a problem, and it kind of stayed with us. Rapid7 at the time decided not to go into that space. They were pursuing other avenues, and then that kind of kept on being like a topic in the background. And eventually HD said like, hey, I'm just going to build a prototype. I want to try this out. Maybe I can put something together that resonates in the market. And so he basically thought through the process. And if you think about asset inventory, most of the solutions out there try to solve for the managed assets on the network, right? It's solutions where you need to install agents on every device. It's solutions where you need to authenticate to each device. So you need credentials, right? Both of those things you can only do if you have a managed device. You can't do that with any unmanaged devices. So now, how would you do it with unmanaged devices? How would you inventory those? And unauthenticated scanning really is the only other real path, except passive network discovery, and we can get to that, right? But with unauthenticated scanning, everybody thought like, this is impossible, right? You can't get to the granularity, you can't get to the data that you need if you can't authenticate and if you don't have an agent. But think about HD's skill set, right? He built Metasploit, and for every exploit that he was planning to send somewhere, he had to fingerprint whether it was the correct system he was trying to apply that to. If you have an exploit for certain types of exploits are really finicky on what types of systems they work on, not only the version, but also if it's like a Korean or a Japanese system, right? Because some of the offsets and stuff like that are different. So you need to really fingerprint the device before you can exploit it. So from Metasploit, I knew he had that skill set. And then also after Metasploit, he worked on the project Sonar at Rapid7, where he scanned the entire internet basically from his house every 7 hours.
I remember reading about that.
And then created a huge data set. I remember that I wanted to download it once, but I didn't have enough space in my house, like as in storage space to actually download it. And it took like a week to unzip or something like that, crazy. So I never actually got to play with the data set. But he did data science on that to figure out what are the big risks out there on the internet that, number one, our industry should be paying attention to. So it was like research to share with the world, but also what should Rapid7 get into and kind of like build into its products, or are there different products we need to build and those kind of things. So that was really cool research. But that's also fingerprinting, right?
Yeah.
And then all of his work doing pen tests. He's always been doing pen tests in the 5 years after Rapid7. He was doing a lot of pen tests. And so when you're a network pen tester, you get thrown into an environment and you don't know what's there. And the first thing that you have to do is recon. So again, that's unauthenticated because you don't have the credentials yet, I guess, right? Mm-hmm. And you need to figure out what's there. So he set out to basically build the most boring thing in the world, which is asset inventory, with some of the coolest kind of like out there ideas that he had from pen testing and from doing all of this stuff. And that's basically what Rumble is.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think one of the questions you probably get a lot of is around like tools like Nmap, right? That what's the difference between Rumble and Nmap? Because you could run Nmap unauthenticated as well. And that's a tool that pen testers and network people are very familiar with, right? That's kind of like the de facto port scanner to find, and a lot of people do use it for asset inventory. What's kind of the difference with Rumble?
Yeah, sure. So Nmap is a fantastic tool, right? I know it's universally loved in the community. It's great for pen tests, for any kind of trying to figure out what's in the environment to try and attack it. Where Nmap has some challenges is number one, it doesn't really tell you a lot about the asset. It collects information based on how do I attack the system, but not so much if I want to inventory it. So it might tell you, hey, this is a Linux 2618 system, but it doesn't tell you, hey, it's a Google Nest camera with this MAC address and this firmware that is attached on this port on a switch, right? And that's what Rumble does. So you get a lot. You get a lot of the same information, but then additional information in Rumble that goes a lot deeper and tells you more about the asset itself. The other thing is that if you do a lot of pen tests, you know that some of the Nmap settings can actually knock over devices, fragile devices, often printers, for example. Same problem with a lot of the vulnerability scanners. And the reason for that is that some of the probes that these kind of tools use are security probes or malformed IP packets that they send over the wire. And if the receiving device isn't built in the most robust way, then you can knock over that device. So printers reboot or spew out pages, and like some PLCs might crash and those kind of.
Yeah. I did that once when I was a pen tester.
Okay, congratulations.
Yes,
You earned your wins. Yeah. And so knowing all of that, HD really built the engine from scratch, the scan engine, right? And so he only sends clean network traffic with Rumble. And then he sniffs that traffic as it comes back. So you don't need a span port for that. You just need the traffic that comes back on the machine. And that gives Rumble a lot more granularity on the data than if we analyzed it higher up in the stack, right? So that's really, really helpful. So you get very safe scans. We scan car manufacturing plants, like one big car manufacturer that you all know scans all of their production plants in Europe with Rumble. The actual production floors.
Wow.
We scan like a big company that owns a bunch of sawmills in different countries. So, like kind of like you have a building, you put a tree in on one side and you get the 2x4s and the pulp out on the other side, right? We scan the OT environments for that. We scan hospitals, we scan windmills, like all sorts of things. And it works, right? There is this perception out there that OT environments you can't scan with an active scanner. You have to go the passive route, and I think that's not really true anymore. And it's not so much that the devices have changed and have become more robust. I think for sure that has happened as well. But if you use the right scan technology and you build it to be a safe scanner from the ground up, then you can make that happen. And we also have other safeguards. So for example, if you know you're scanning an environment that is very sensitive to traffic, for example, you can just reduce the number of packets that each end node receives. And once let's say you only want to send 10 packets a second per node. If that 10 packets per second is used up on the first node and we still have more time in the second left, we'll just go to the second and the third and we go round robin around the network and then go back and scan the same thing again. So just because you're sending a small amount of traffic to each node, you can still scan the entire network in a short amount of time, right? And that's what really works. And then if you compare it, most of our customers tell us that they get the scans back in about 1/10 of the time that it takes a regular vulnerability scanner to scan the network. So it's also super, super fast.
Yeah, I noticed that myself. So I downloaded it and played with Rumble a little bit the other day. And I have a home network here, but I was really impressed. Like a couple minutes, and it had my entire network scanned, identified all my devices. which is really cool. So
yeah,
thanks.
I'm happy you saw that too.
Yeah, I really like it. So what types of things do you commonly see? I guess when we're talking about OT networks, let's talk about that first. That you're finding through Rumble.
So on the OT side, people just don't really have any good inventory. Usually it's spreadsheet sheet based. It's manual discovery. They're just completely blind on those networks. When we think about the IT networks, it's a lot of the a lot of shadow IT, a lot of smart building stuff. We have one customer who runs a big museum, and he found a backnet device in the basement through Rumble that had been there since the building had been built, and he had no idea. Right. So stuff that's, and we all know that, especially as a pen tester yourself, that if you have one vulnerable device that gives somebody a foothold, that can bring down the entire network, right? If we think of, this is a few years back, but the Sands Casino had this one thermostat in a fish tank that I'm sure wasn't a managed device. The attackers got in through that, got into a part of the network that they could pivot on and own the casino. So knowing what's on your network is important. And we find some crazy things, and some of those you just don't expect. One customer scanned their network, and they had like maybe a couple of thousand IPs normally or something like that. It's assets, not a huge network. And from one day to another, all of a sudden he had 65,000. And he's like opening a support ticket and saying like, hey, I think your scanner is a little crazy. And we looked into it, and what it turned out to be was that the ISP, their ISP had misconfigured the network connection and had exposed the ISP's entire internal network to the customer.
Wow.
Right. So in the end, our customer phoned his ISP, and they corrected it and so on, and then it was fine. But it's those kind of things that you wouldn't even expect. Now, this was a risk more for the ISP than for our customer, but it's very interesting nonetheless. We had another customer where they had a rogue admin that they ended up firing, and they figured out that there was like this big part of the network that they scanned with Rumble that had machines on it that they knew nothing about. And it was an admin that had been hosting illegal content out of their home network, but VPN'd into the company. So the gateway was on the company network. So the Rumble data, the scan set, was actually used by law enforcement to kind of prosecute that case. But more normally, what people find is machines that have fallen off the domain. You might have your Active Directory domain, and most of the machines are on there, but then you have a long tail of machines that aren't. They're development machines, or they weren't properly joined to the Active Directory network, or there's some kind of machine in the corner that only does like the badging system or something like that, right? But those machines aren't getting patched, they aren't getting vuln scanned, they aren't getting, they don't have the right controls on it, like your endpoint detection, antivirus, those kind of things. So just in terms of, I think of it less in terms of vulnerabilities, but more network hygiene. Be aware of what's on your network, and then have a look at it through all sorts of lenses. We help you find all of the one-off kind of protocols and products that you have on the network. So as a pen tester, one thing that's really interesting is when you scan the environment, ignore all of the things that are there, 10,000 times. Look at the thing that's only there once.
That's right.
Right? Because that's probably not top of mind, and it's not getting patched, or it might even be like a really old version that like some legacy system in the corner. And so Rumble is really good at that, kind of like pivoting over any attribute and then giving you the long tail that you need to pay attention to. We also have a lot of queries in there, pre-built queries, like all of the data set that we have in the product you can query. So you can say, I want to know all of my Exchange servers, all of my XSIM servers, all of my Ubiquity devices, like all of these things where you need to rapidly respond to an event out there. And sometimes it's a vulnerability, sometimes with the Ubiquity, I think it was just leaked passwords, right? So That's not a vulnerability in the device, but it's still a risk to the business, and you want to know if you have one of those on there.
SolarWinds too would be a good
And
one.
so yeah, we have we have a query for that.
I'll bet.
and but then also what's interesting is that some people, they might not have enough budget for their vulnerability scanner to scan the entire environment, just in terms of IPs or IP space. And so they just scan the servers, or they just scan the external perimeter and so on. And with Rumble, because we have a friendlier licensing term, you could scan your entire network. And we now have a new feature where you can figure out if there are any parts of the network that you haven't scanned, number one. And number two, if we have any indicators that there are machines on that part of the network. So let me back up a moment to kind of explain that. Rumble has some neat ways to look around corners. So for example, through NetBIOS, if you ask the right questions and interrogate the device, you can not only get the IP address that you're speaking with, but also the IP addresses of any secondary NICs, right? Yeah. So now you know that this device is multi-homed and sometimes in several network segments. So you can now say, all right, we've scanned this segment, but this device has leaked that it's also got active IPs in that other segment that you haven't scanned. And so we assume that there are machines there. You should definitely cover that, right? So those should be your first ones. And then all of the other space are the secondary ones. And those kind of features, by the way, this multi-homed feature is also super interesting because you can do network segmentation testing. You can just look at the network and you can have a look at, first of all, is there any bridge from a public IP to a private IP, right? If I attack that machine and I get through, now I'm on the internal network. And then you can look, okay, from that segment, are there any bridges to another segment? So it really maps it out, only shows you the multi-home devices to pivot on. And that's super helpful both for the defenders to find segmentation issues, but also for attackers who want to figure out what's the fastest path to get to the target.
Yeah.
And so that's really interesting. Yeah. Another way to look around corners is, and we use this a ton in the asset inventory, is getting MAC addresses, right? So if you can get a MAC address, then you basically get the vendor, you often get the model of the machine, you get the approximate manufacturing date, and in most cases, you would only be able to get the MAC address if you're on the same broadcast domain as the device. But there are so many ways of getting MAC addresses remotely. So for example, if you ask a printer to give you the ARP cache, you can use that and you can merge it back in, right? There's many other ways. Like sometimes the MAC address is kind of like encoded in some field, like sometimes in the serial number, or sometimes it's in some other field. So we have all of these different ways of getting MAC addresses, and that also helps really identify and kind of bring things together.
Spring and summer are upon us, and that means it's time for some much-needed vacation time with friends and family. But this also means that you need to be aware of data privacy and how to protect your laptops, smartphones, and key fobs while traveling. Airports and other public areas can often be targeted by attackers looking to gain access to your devices through their wireless signals. So instead of worrying about disabling or turning off wireless functions, it's so much easier to place them in a Faraday bag when they're not being used. And if you want the best protection that you can get, you want to be using Silent Pocket's premium Faraday bag product line that blocks all wireless signals. So don't forget to get yourself a Faraday bag before you head out on your vacation. And right now, you can use discount code SHAREDSECURITY and receive 10% off your order during checkout at silentpocket.com.
You want your organization to be secure and compliant and to have a healthy culture, but your employees' lack of awareness makes you vulnerable to data theft, fraud, and compliance penalties. It's frustrating that the boring, static training content that's being used today has failed to improve employees' ability to defend against cyber attacks. At ClickArmor, we know that without using gamification, it's extremely hard to get staff to understand how to avoid threats. Our gamified simulations and challenges have provided a 50% average improvement in thousands of employees' ability to spot phishing threats. Go to clickarmor.ca/shared security to get your free gamified phishing assessment for up to 500 employees. You'll see quickly how gamified simulations can help your team be more resilient and compliant and help avoid costly ransomware and fraud incidents. Let ClickArmor help you go from being an underappreciated, stressed out fall guy to being an innovative leader who's the catalyst for greater productivity in your organization.
So when we're talking about just asset inventory, like, what's the type of departments or people in an organization that would use something like Rumble?
So we really have 2 or 3 buyers. So the first one is the vulnerability management team. They want to just get a better idea of what's on the network. Typically they get, the usual conversation we have is, hey, we get this spreadsheet from IT that's supposedly the asset inventory list. And it's got gaps that we already know about. It's outdated and it's really not all that helpful. And oftentimes, like, it's scary, but a lot of companies still put that together manually, which seems crazy. Like companies big and small, right? And so the vulnerability management team loves Rumble because it's super easy to deploy. They don't need credentials. They only need it to deploy in the same way that, sometimes you just put it on the same machines that you have the vulnerability scanner on. You already know that those can reach the majority of the network or the entire network. The Rumble Explorer is super small, so it doesn't need a lot of resources, and you just drop it there and you go scan and you get a much better picture of the network. The second team that we sell to is the incident response team. So they typically want to know, first of all, they want to know context on a device that is under, like, if you're triaging some device, right? So you might have an alert that says, hey, this IP address reached out to a known command and control server, something like that. And you're trying to figure out, okay, is this real? What is it? How do I react? If you look at your vulnerability scanner, it's probably only going to tell you, like, it's, this generic Linux system with that version number, if you get that. With Rumble, we can really tell you exactly what the device is, if it's, like the MAC address, the make and model, all of that stuff. So if it's like a smart smoke detector, right? Now it's a smart smoke detector. So you can go around the building, you look at the chassis on the side, you see if it's the same MAC address, you take the thing off and you get rid of it, right? The other thing that you can do is you just feed all of the scans into Splunk or some other SIM, and you can go back in time and you can say, all right, was this always on this network? Did it skip from one network to another? Was it used somewhere else? Did it start exposing any new services, any changes on the device over time, right? So you get a little bit of the time capsule there. And then the third team is the team inside the IT organization that's responsible for the CMDB. Because what we find is that there are some great solutions out there that create a database to create a CMDB, but they often have really bad ways of discovering what's on the network. So oftentimes companies bring us in and they scan the network and then feed that scan data into their CMDB. And we have out-of-the-box integrations for that. And oftentimes in bake-offs, we see that we find 2.5 times as many devices as the CMDB auto-discovery solution did. So that's a huge delta. And even though most of those solutions are authenticated, which also explains why they find fewer devices, the kind of data and the richness of the data is actually pretty close to what they're seeing in the other tool. Plus, usually we're also doing a little bit better on the cost side, right? Just because we're not a major brand that has the big price tickets.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So I think this is probably a good time to see a quick demo of Rumble. I think our audience
Sure.
would love to watch this. So if you're listening to this on the audio version, you could jump to our YouTube channel and check out the demo here of Rumble.
So basically, if you go to rumble.run, sorry, I need to type properly here. If you go to rumble.run, you are able to get either a 21-day version of the full Rumble solution for the professional edition, and you can try that out. Or if you just want to use it for your home network, we have a version that's free for up to 256 live assets. So it's not only the IP range, but actually live assets in the system. And you can also bring that to work. If you work for a small company or for a nonprofit or anything like that, even a commercial business, as long as you stay underneath those 256 assets, you're free to use it for free.
Oh, that's nice.
For on the network. So we have a lot of people like that, and they enjoy it a ton. And then a lot of them actually bring us into their workplace because they try Rumble out on the home network, like it, and then have the conversation at work. So once you start the trial, Rumble is by default a SaaS solution, especially if you're using the free version, it's always SaaS. For the paid version, we do have a self-hosted version where the console is self-hosted in your own environment. But let's assume that this is a cloud deployment. First thing you would do is you deploy what we call a Rumble Explorer. So those are basically the scan engines that you put on the network. And so those explorers come in flavors for different operating systems. You can install this literally from anything from a Raspberry Pi to a mainframe. Nice. This is not the regular use case for most of our corporate customers, right? Enterprise customers who put it usually on a Windows box or Ubuntu box or something like that. But if you're using this as a pen tester, this can be really helpful, right? If let's say you compromise a video camera, you can actually install the Rumble Explorer on the video camera and then scan the network from there. And it's very fast, it's very accurate, very lightweight. And the other thing is, since we only send clean network traffic, you're not going to flag any signatures, right? So there's no security probes, no Nmap traffic that goes over the wire. Of course, if you had a honeypot and you connect to a port, that will alert, right? But otherwise, it doesn't. So a lot of pen testers kind of like this. It's not the main use case that we have this for, but a lot of pen testers actually find this quite useful. So you deploy the Explorer on the network. If you have a complex network with different sites, different segments, and so on, you may want to deploy a variety of Explorers. We don't charge extra for those. So just make it so that you have a good footprint on the network. You're able to reach all of the parts of the network over layer 3. And then you go into the inventory and hit new scan. And then it's, like most of the settings are pretty similar to what you'd know from your vulnerability scanner. So you say how often you want to run it. You want to have it recurring. What's your discovery scope? All those sorts of things. And scan speed. And then I talked about the maximum host rate, like how many packets do I want to send to an end node? 40 is a good, decent number for a regular IT network. But then we also have some fun ways to speed up the scans. So if you have a big internal IP space, if you want to scan all of RFC 1918, right? That can take a really long time. There are two features that you can use to speed that up without just speeding, increasing the scan speed. So you can first of all set this setting here, where you basically split up your network, your /8/16, into smaller chunks. Like here, it's set up to chunk it up in /24s, and then we test a certain percentage of that subnet and see if we find any machines. If we find machines, we start scanning the entire range. If we don't find machines, we move on. So that's one thing that really speeds it up. And then the second one is, this is one is very simple. This is basically ping an IP address before you do a full port scan. We scan about 500 ports. They're the ports that we find give us the best information for an asset inventory. And so if you have this one on, if an IP doesn't respond to a ping, it just moves on to the next one. If you have both of those on, and you're scanning a /16 that only has a handful of machines on, then we can scan that in about 10 minutes. So that's super, super fast if you compare that to a vulnerability scanner. And that makes it feasible to cover more of the surface area of your internal network. And what we find is that a ton of our customers actually find segments of the network that they didn't know they had any machines on. It's crazy. And when we look at the coverage map across all of our customers, where we see leaked secondary IP addresses, I think it was 2/3 of accounts, and this includes also the home users, right? 2/3 of accounts where we found indicators of secondary of network segments that weren't getting scanned. So it was a huge, huge number. I'm sure there's some false positives in there, but just anecdotally from talking to customers, they find a ton there. So then once you've done the scans, you basically get a list of all of your devices. And now you can start querying these devices. So you can say, I want to have all of the ones that are vendor Cisco, right? So search for that. Now you want to say, and I only want to have the ones that were alive on the last scan. So that reduces it down even more. And then now I want to have only the ones that are type switch, right? So you see how you can really dig in and really get very concise on this. So I'm going to reset this query so we see the full data set. And I'm going to switch to a different demo set here. Now, I talked about the secondary IPs. So this is an example. This datasets box here has a total of 4 IPs. And if we go into that device, this is the IP that we scanned, the 192.168. And then these here are the other IP addresses that it leaked. So now we know this machine is multi-homed. If we then look at that on the network bridges report, we now see a map of all of the devices. So you see the cloud up here, right? And the red circle indicates that it's a public-facing IP segment. And on that public-facing IP segment, we've got 2 devices. One is a router, that's pretty fine, but then the datasets box. And then the datasets box is bridging into this subnet here, which has a Mac Mini on it that bridges into this network. So now if this network here is your card holo data environment that you're trying to protect under PCI, now you're two compromised boxes away from somebody getting into that segment, right? And all of this is unauthenticated. You just put the scanner on the network. And then if you add certain things like SNMP, you get a richer picture. Then you can also look at the layer 2 topology, switch topology here. And here the green circles are machines that we scanned that we know about, right? And the red diamonds indicate that the switch told us that there is something there, but we know we haven't scanned it directly. So this is probably a VLAN that the Explorer doesn't have access to, for example. So we can show you where you have blind spots in your asset inventory. Then the domain membership report here that I talked about earlier, this is a pretty small test network. So, but what you typically see is on the top line, you'd see your primary domain. So like, 1,000 machines belonging to Acme Corporation. And then underneath that, you have a long list of all of the secondary ones. You can also look at any of these attributes. So for example, if I want to know all of the SQL Server versions on my network, I'm going to pivot to, there's none on this network, but I'm going to pivot to a different list here. This is actually, normally we scan internal networks, right, for our customers. But for test data sets, we scan entire countries. So this is all of Iceland. We've scanned all of Greece, all of North Korea, and so on. It's like, it's fun as a stress test for the engine, but it's also really cool data. Yeah. So now we see all of the versions, the SQL Server versions, and how many there are on my network. And if I click through here, I'll run a query, and that gives me all of the exact machines that I can then go and export or tag and so on. We use a lot of tagging with our customers to help with our processes. So a ton of different reports here. And then we have the pre-baked queries. So with those, we create a query for you that is probably something that you might be interested in. So this example here is super simple. It's just any machine that's multi-home that has both a public and a private network connection. And here, all the query is has public true and has private true. It's very simple. If you know how the query language works, it's super simple to type that up. But still, it's helpful if you're new to the system to kind of see that. But then we also have some queries that are a lot more complex or longer. So for example, this query here finds all of the devices that are either Huawei or ZTE or any of the subsidiaries or OEMs and all of those things that you're probably not supposed to have on a critical infrastructure network. So we kind of do the legwork for you because you might not know, like all the names that these devices are under that Huawei owns. And this works pretty well. So if we actually run this query, I think Iceland has a pretty big footprint because they, one of their ISPs, it's like almost 2,000 devices that we have on the Iceland.
That's
on the Iceland network. So 2,000 devices out of 72,000. That's a lot, right? That's a lot. And we see some routers here. I think one of their main ISPs uses Huawei routers as like the standard home router, and then some DVRs and all that stuff. Yeah, so you can certainly poke around and find interesting stuff there. And then you can also alert on those things. So you can write rules and create rules to, you write a query and then you say, tell me each time that this query is true. And then either tag the device so that I can go into my queue and find all of the ones that are tagged as investigate, or I can use a webhook to push it into a Slack channel or another product. I can send the security team an email. So that's all doable as well. And then from a pen test perspective, and we need to see, I've not done this on the Iceland set, but from a pen test perspective, or if you want to feel really uncomfortable as a CISO, you can also just go to the main dashboard. And here it lists the top 5,000 products and protocols. Just scroll all the way to the bottom, right? You'll see a lot of the things that you probably didn't know you had on the network and that you might want to check out. Yeah, so that's pretty much the Nico tour. There's a lot more in terms of depth to the product, but that's pretty much the core functionality.
Very cool. Very cool. So I think the big question is, where do our listeners go if they want to check out Rumble, and what are the details around that?
Yeah, so it's very easy. You just go to rumble.run, go to the top right corner, click on Try Rumble. Well, first you might want to read the website and so on, but I've pretty told you pretty much what's on the website, so you might want to skip that step. If you type in a business email address, then you get the full pro version as a 21-day trial. If you prefer to just stick with a free version, just go to the pricing page and choose the free version, and then you can use any email address. And then it takes you literally, like, how long did it take you? You said you tried it the other day?
4 minutes. Yeah.
4 minutes?
Yeah. It was crazy fast. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So it's not complicated. So if you have a boring conference call, you can probably do that on the side, right? And then get some visibility. And most customers are surprised, number one, how fast it is. Yeah, I think you echoed that. Most people also are surprised how much data we get on each device without having credentials. And then also they often find something that's on the network that they didn't expect. So I'll show you some of the fun stuff so I have a data set here that's just ProLiant servers, HP ProLiant servers. And the amount of data, this is all unauthenticated. The amount of data that you can get off of these devices is crazy. You get anything from the exact DMC version and hardware version to the serial number of the device and a ton of other information that just comes straight out of the ILO, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, I actually found
some fun research behind this.
Yeah, I found a Raspberry Pi that I forgot about that was still plugged in my basement. So Rumble for the win right there.
Yeah. See, and I think like in your network at home, like you're the only person, maybe some of your family members too, right? That plug anything in, and still it's hard, and it's a small network. But now imagine a large company that has some turnover in IT that's maybe been around for a few decades. It's a little crazy what you find.
Totally. Well, I'm a huge fan of Rumble. This is awesome. I think our listeners will be as well after seeing the demo and hearing all about the product. But where can they find out more about you and follow the cool stuff that you're doing?
Sure. So my name is Chris Kirsch on LinkedIn. You can connect to me there if you have any questions. That's a good place to go. I'm on Twitter at Chris_Kirsch. That's a lot of the Rumble stuff I'll repost there also on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in some of the pickpocketing stuff or some of the other things that I've done, I've also done some talks on like using cold reading techniques, which is the techniques to make other people think that you're a fortune teller and so on. So I've done some write-ups on that stuff on Medium. So if you just search for, I guess, Kirsch Medium pickpocketing or Kirsch Medium cold reading or something like that, you'll find one of my articles, and you can then, click on the author, you'll see the full list. And I also have some stuff on like how to protect yourself from identity theft and stuff. There's some other topics there.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll have all that linked in our show notes. But Chris, thanks again for coming on the show. This has been a pleasure. Great to catch up and awesome to see the cool things that you and HD are doing at Rumble.
Really appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much.